Throughout its history, Notre Dame athletics has inspired men and women onward to victory in the game of life, often despite tremendous odds against them. These journeys have manifested themselves in a variety of physical, mental, and spiritual forms, but one element binds them together: persistence fueled by the spirit of Notre Dame. We will fight in every game, strong of heart and true to her name. Coming up next on Strong of Heart, Steve Boda's incredible story of how recording Notre Dame statistics helped him endure his time in an orphanage during the Great Depression.
I think Steve is probably typical of a lot of people who somehow found that a passion for Notre Dame, and maybe a passion for Notre Dame athletics, and in this particular case a passion for Notre Dame football, was able to do some amazing things for them in terms of their lives. And the sorts of things that Steve was creating in the sports information field have really paid huge dividends for Notre Dame in a lot of ways, because it provided us with the ability to answer questions and provide facts and figures and names that otherwise wouldn't have been there.
Notre Dame came into my life from the beginning of the 1930 season. My father took me to the Notre Dame game, and for some reason I took a pad along and I began the play like Savoldi, 2 yards. And I did that for all Notre Dame's games through 1933. In November of 1933, my mother died unexpectedly, and with that, that just added to a very difficult time. We had relatives, but they had their problems too. My father was unable to raise us, and we went to this Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Children's Home in Knightstown, Indiana. Being an institution, we were the wards of the state of Indiana. My father had no control over us anymore. It was a very difficult place to go to. There are 600 children in that institution, 150 miles away. I never got to see my sister and brothers, but by being and recording Notre Dame, I believe it got me through 8 years of difficult time. And it was always my desire, once I got out of the orphanage, that I would go back there in South Bend and I could go to every Notre Dame game. In the fall, Indianapolis had a station that carried all of Notre Dame's games, as did WLW of Cincinnati. I was able to listen to the radio because nobody wanted to stay in. They all wanted to go out and play, so I had the radio to myself. And I'd ask my father to send me a Notre Dame program so that I'd have lineups. And from then on, through the 1940 season, it continued. When I got out of there, graduated, I went back to South Bend. They didn't have an official score for their Big Four high schools that went to school field. So the high schools paid me $5 a game, which was a nice figure. In the last game of the 1941 season, a 6'4" gentleman sat down at our press table, and at the end of the game he said, "I never saw anybody record a game charted." In other words, a play-by-play. So he gave me a card and he said, I would like to have you join my press crew for the final game next week against Southern California. And I was astonished. When he left, I asked people, I said, who was that person? He said, Joe Petritz. He's the sports information director of Notre Dame.
I think when Steve got into the whole idea of dealing with statistics at Notre Dame, one of the things that was tremendously valuable to us was that he created a section that we call the all-time lineups that included every single player who played at least 1 second or more in a football game. But within that, it also included depth charts so that you had every single player and where they fit within the team, their position, their height, their weight, and whether or not they won a letter.
In games years and years ago, the sports editions of the Sunday papers always carried a play-by-play. Were it not for that, there would only be references and not actual statistics. The pre-1937 records, like George Gipp, the Four Horsemen, all of those statistics have to be recreated with the 1937 guidelines, something that makes them officially recognized. I took it upon myself to begin creating records in depth.
It would be one thing to talk about doing this in fairly recent years. It's another thing to talk about coming up with this sort of information for teams and seasons back in the 1800s. And so once he got a feel for it in conjunction with Notre Dame, he was able to segue into working with the NCAA for numerous decades and essentially create a career that really impacted essentially every school in the country that was benefiting from his research and his statistical work.
Over here are all the NCAA football guides, official football guides back into the 20s. And of course you have the Notre Dame files here. Let's see, let's just pick one out. This one, this is the famous Ohio State game, 1935. Ohio State was, a powerhouse. They were predicting Ohio State as some 30-point favorites. Notre Dame had been just thoroughly pretty much beaten, although they had only given up 13 points. But what happened in the second half, and it's one of the remarkable things about the game, Elmer Layden started the second half with his second string line. And that line in the second half held this powerhouse Ohio State team to 1 net yard. I'm going to show you the drive chart of that. And,
every Saturday when you come into the press box, you have to bring a number of things with you. But the one thing I always came equipped with was Steve Boda's home phone number.
Here at the university, we're the first ones to tell people that Steve Boda is the expert when it comes to statistics at Notre Dame. You want to talk about football, if you're going to get into any level of detail, you can't do that without Steve Boda having been a big part of that.
I knew what these symbols were. These were rushing, first down there. Passing was either incomplete and X or to who they were completed to.
A lot of the contributions that Steve made really were in his spare time, particularly when he got involved with the NCAA and was working full-time in that area. The Notre Dame part of it was something that he didn't have to do, but he did it just simply because of his love for the university, and the statistical part of it was right up his alley in terms of his own career and what he did. And so in a lot of ways, really, it was a perfect fit, both for Steve and for Notre Dame.
I think he's a good role model for perseverance because he kept at it every day of his life. He was inspired by Notre Dame football. He was inspired to keep records of Notre Dame football, and his great work for Notre Dame and sports information especially has been really a lifelong story.
Even though I was interrupted somewhat going to the orphanage, I never wavered. I never wanted to be anything else. Just a historian, and that's what I like to think that I am, a college football historian. Just the fact that there was a Notre Dame, I was able to do it, the records, it gave me something to follow, and Notre Dame was home, South Bend. And I love South Bend yet. It's not the city that I last knew, but it is home, still home.